All right, folks, we can get started. Welcome in. If you are comfortable, you can add pronouns to your display name on Zoom. And you can do so by clicking participants, then hovering over your name in the right corner of the screen. And then you can click more and choose rename. Oh. Okay. So we can get started with today's session, holding the fact that California community colleges train 80% of the state's police force. We focus on community safety today, which is one of the core goals of the Build Abolition 101 project. Many of us throw this term community safety around, but what does it actually mean? What does it materially and concretely look like? And how do we continue to practice it, right? Because we all have been in our own ways. I think of many of the things we've already been talking about, like harm reduction, self-defense, accessibility, storytelling, community interventions, safety planning, and so much more. And I'm honored to introduce three lovely folks joining us today who will dive deeper with us in this journey of community safety. So first up, we have Guerilla Davis from Arm the Girls, an initiative from We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For and Join the Movement Coalition, which centers LGBTQ plus BIPOC. Second, we have Tatiana Luboviski-Acosta from CCSF's Project Survive, who will discuss peer education and ending sexual and intimate partner violence. And finally, we'll have Leo Hedge from APIENC, who will share a model of community safety among the trans, Asian, and Pacific Islander community. This session is a little different. After the Q&A session, we'll have an open discussion with everyone on how we are building this abolitionist community training program. I can start off by introducing myself. My name is Jai Deem Jung. You can call me Troy, T-R-O-I, and I use she, her pronouns. I'll also give a visual description. I have my camera on. I am a lighter-skinned Vietnamese person with short black hair and a septum piercing. I'm also wearing a bright red hoodie, currently against a light blue wall in bed. I'm a disabled trans undergrad student studying ethnic studies, and I do a bit of work here and there around mutual aid, reentry support, and transformative justice education. And let me check. Oh, okay. And Brittany is my co-facilitator today. Brittany, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, hi, thank you. So I'm here on Chochenyo Ohlone land. My name is Brittany. I'm sorry I'm not going to have my video on today. Not feeling my best. But I just want to recognize that I'm so happy to share community here with y'all. And thank you so much for the introduction. So I'll go here. Thanks.
Thanks, Brittany. Glad you're here. Okay, so we recognize and acknowledge that so-called San Francisco is located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. And we encourage non-Indigenous members to uplift the work of rematriation and land taxes. Next slide, please. And on top of this, we also want to be intentional about how we're creating Black, Indigenous, and people of color-centered spaces. We want to move forward by creating practices to prioritize our BIPOC members and to proactively decenter whiteness, to dismantle white supremacy, anti-Blackness, trans misogynoir, and colorism. And because of this, we'll start our facilitated discussion to be only open to BIPOC first, centering those who are trans, queer, disabled, etc. And then with the last 5 minutes, it'll be open to all. So please be mindful of this in the breakout rooms as well. If you are white, please DM the person marked host in this meeting, which I believe is, oh, it says host in the name. And so that we can mindfully, oh, there are no breakout rooms this session, apologies. Ignore that then. But the chat is open to everyone. We ask white people to please be mindful about taking up a lot of space and don't ask BIPOC for labor and knowledge you can actively look for yourselves. The Zoom sessions will continue to be open for anyone to join. And then we have a mutual aid fund that will go toward paying the speakers with payments toward BIPOC speakers prioritized. And thank you, Jacqueline, for putting that link in the chat. Okay, and then our care coordinators, the amazing Tira and Kari, will be providing support during the session. So please feel free to DM them if you're feeling triggered or re-traumatized, or if you need resources around care. Okay, and I'll pass it on to Brittany to introduce the girls.
Thank you. Oh, give me 1 second here. Yeah, so with that being said, let's begin with Arm the Girls. Arm the Girls is a Bay Area mutual aid initiative, putting power and safety directly into the hands of Black and Indigenous queer and trans femmes of color. The community-led initiative will equip BIPOC, queer, and trans femmes with emergency funding support, holistic health and wellness resources, paid self-defense classes, and self-defense kits in a designer bag, right? Because we want to look cute too. Queer and transphobia, along with capitalism, misogyny, and racism, are part of the white supremacist legacy of colonialism. One of the proven ways that we can fight back is through helping each other building strong systems of mutual aid, collecting to reclaim and radicalize resources lost to poverty and sociocultural marginalization, putting power and safety directly into the hands of those who need it most. With that said, we are thankful to have one of the co-founders of the initiative speak, Guerilla Davis.
Hello, good evening. I was gonna say afternoon. I hope everyone is doing well on this nice, chilly, drizzly evening. My name is Guerilla Davis. I'm one of the co-founders of We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For, which is a collective here in the East Bay that organizes around mutual aid and parties. We do a lot of parties. Just also, I had a really long day and I'm kind of winded, so please be patient and please bear with me. I'm glad to be here to talk with you all about abolition. So one thing when I think about abolition, so abolition is basically like abolishing the police, abolishing the cops. But one thing that I think about often and that I see a lot on the street is cancel culture. Does everyone know what cancel culture is? You can go in the chat. Cancel culture. Has anyone ever seen anybody get canceled before? Have you been canceled before or been threatened to be canceled? We all know what cancel culture is. It's very prevalent. It's alive and well. It's entertaining. It's tea. It's funny. It's also very dangerous, and it can be quite violent. So the reason why I'm talking about cancel culture while we're on the topic of abolition is because the way that cancel culture is existing for us right now is directly related to the way that we as Black, brown, queer, and trans people experience our lives in living in white supremacy. So I know that's a lot, right? I'm just gonna talk a little bit about the work that we do, and then I'll get more into the cancel culture. Oh, a visual description of myself. Let's see. So I am half Black. I'm half Filipino. I'm 5'8.5" I have a shaved head. I'm wearing glasses, pearl earrings, a black shirt, medium tan, medium builds. I'm also a Scorpio. Scorpios. Is that a okay visual description? I'm sorry. Okay. So when we started this collective, it was me and my partner at the time, and it was during the height of the migrant border crisis, and we were in touch with people who were helping trans asylum seekers cross the border, and there was a safe housing collective in Texas that needed support, and we basically threw an art show so that we could raise money to send funds to this housing collective that also had a network of trans asylum seekers in detention. So essentially what we were doing was we were throwing parties so that we can raise money to send trans asylum seekers money while they were in detention. And then also this network was when folks were getting released from detention, they were helping them, get out of detention and then have housing and then just live and then helping them navigate their cases. So we were throwing parties to help sustain this work. And we teamed up with another crew called Visibility, which is based here in the Bay Area, which does work around helping trans asylum seekers navigate their immigration cases. And we started doing parties, having art shows, and throwing renegades. Has anyone ever been to a renegade? So like I learned how to DJ doing this work. I've been DJing for like 2 years, so I've learned how to DJ doing this work, which has been really cool. And one thing that a common theme to all the work that we do, aside from mutual aid, is safety and power. So when you go to a club, has anyone ever been to a club and then you see like a fight happens in a club? So usually what happens is like the bouncer is like this big man in like a suit or a SWAT uniform or something. He just comes, takes the dude and throws him out. No questions, there's no conversation, nothing happens. So when we throw parties, what we like to do, one, and this is something that we learned over time, was accessibility, making sure that the venue is accessible. And if it's not, because oftentimes you're throwing a party in like a warehouse or a dangerous place, at least having information that lets people know if it's accessible or not. Having that there is part of safety, but also we don't like to have security. We call our team like a safety patrol. And basically we have a crew of people that are trained in de-escalation, mediation, and conflict resolution. And it's basically an alternative to bouncers and an alternative to the zero tolerance culture that kind of dominates our capitalist society. So I'm going to talk about myself for a little bit. So I was raised in a super strict Christian Filipino household, super strict, very zero tolerance. I couldn't have any friends. I couldn't do anything. I basically couldn't live, basically. And when you look at America, excuse me, I need to take a break. I'm so sorry. Excuse me. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so as queer and trans people, I'm sure we've all experienced cancel culture in some form or shape. For me, personally, I've experienced it in many ways. And when you have multiple intersecting identities, so for me, I'm gonna speak for myself. I'm Black, Filipino, queer. There's three. But, you know, someone could be trans, disabled. You know, the more intersectional that your identity is, the more at risk you are for cancel culture or for being canceled. Not from necessarily, well, yeah, you're basically more at risk of all the shit, all the violence, all the canceling. And that's kind of like the idea that I think about when we talk about abolition and we talk about safety. I want to also think about this idea of canceling people, because if you cancel people, you're not really allowing people the space to be or to exist and to grow. So there are some instances, okay, hold on. There are some instances like there's rapists, there's murderers, and there's all these crazy people, and there's these racists and, you know, violent people. And that's true. Sometimes people just need to get their ass beat. You know, I'm not gonna lie. But when you meet violence with violence, it just creates more violence, right? Ultimately, I feel like the best thing to do is to allow a way or a space for people to grow and for people to change. So one thing that we've done with Arm the Girls was we wanted to reimagine what power and safety looks like for Black and brown, queer and trans people. So how are we gonna do that? So queer and trans people experience all this violence, right? From mostly men, also from society, from church, from jobs, from the healthcare system, from so many different things. I'm like, how can we change this narrative of death and violence on trans people? And I was like, let's put a gun in a trans person's hands and let's blow it up, right? Let's do that and see what happens. And it started this like nationwide conversation around, I don't know, there was a lot of reaction to it. It's a mixed bag. But the thing for me is, if you go to like Instagram and you look up the Army and you look up the Navy, actually you could just turn on television and go to the news. There's like guns and violence all the time. Like the military, the police, it's so like seeing white men in uniform with guns is so normalized in our culture that is like what safety looks like to us, when actually that is what has been killing the world for so long. Okay. But when you see a Black or brown, queer, trans person with a gun in their hands defending their life, then that's a problem. So like, what's up with that? So this Arm the Girls, the project, aside from the tasers and the Telfar bags and all the things that we do, we really wanted to change or start this conversation around what power and safety can look like in a creative way that would help change the culture of how we think about ourselves and how we think about safety and how we think about living with each other. Does anyone have any questions or anything?
I had a comment about something you said earlier about like fighting in clubs. Trigger warning to people, white people being white and being entitled. I was in a place and some white guy kept harassing me. I turned around and was like, hey, cut that shit out. Then he did it again. I was like, hey, cut it out. And then the third time, like, you know, I popped the fuck off. And I was just like ready to fucking fight. I was like 2 seconds and all the lights in the place turned on and I was kicked out, right? Rather than the fucking weirdo being kicked out. You know what I mean? And it just like, I really wanted to share that because like, it was like so true. Like that oftentimes, like when they have to remove people, they often remove the Black person, you
Right.
know? And fortunately, a bunch of brown queers had my back, and they were like they spreaded the information as to what happened, but it just like, it was a lot, you know? Like it just was a lot. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, right. Because at clubs, bouncers, they're not really trained in de-escalation or conflict resolution. They should be, but a lot of times it's just very zero tolerance. It's very like, you're out. And oftentimes they go for, you know, the brown, the Black person, whatever. But in the spaces and the parties that we create, we always want to hold space to mediate, to say like, hey, what's up? Or to check in. Maybe this person is drunk. Maybe this person needs water. You know what I mean?
Or maybe they just need their ass whooped. You know what I'm talking about? Like at the end of the day, if you set a boundary, I like if I set a boundary, I expect it to be respected, period. You know, I set it, you know, that's what boundaries are. And if you cross the boundary, you can expect to catch a fade, period.
Right, period. Boundaries are very important. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
I'd love to hear more how you did the safety network in Oakland. Okay, so during the height of the protests, the BLM uprising, there was, did anyone go to any of the riots and protests and stuff? I mean, I went to a lot of them. We organized a couple actions too. And one of the safety things that came up for us as a collective was having like a squad. So like like a kind of like a protocol for people. Like if I'm gonna go out, make sure I have, you know, a mask, water, at least 2 people who know where I am or 2 people with me at all times. Like a little pod, you know, to go out so that you can be safe. Writing your someone's phone number on your arm in case you get arrested. My roommate got arrested 2 times. There was like this little network of information being shared on an app called Signal. And out of that, there grew this like, there's just this communication going on with folks around keeping people safe without calling the police. One of the conversations being had in this network was like how to be safe from the police and then how to keep each other safe without having to call the police. And then we started this document and we wanted to grow an official like network called the No Popo Safety Network. And we started compiling information from folks who are trained with like de-escalation, conflict resolution, mental health folks, emergency medical people, people who knew first aid. Basically, we had like a whole list of people that you could call for any kind of crisis, from domestic violence to mental health to like a physical, you know, accident. We had a whole list of people that you could call, and that would be an alternative to 911. The network never officially launched, but like there's these group chats on Signal that exist that were birthed from the riots and the protests that happened recently. And people are still in touch and asking like, hey, there's someone over here who needs help or whatever. Like for example, there was a Black trans person who was having a mental health crisis in one of my friends' homes, and they didn't know what to do with her, or how to handle or how to support her. And because of like the chat that we had, like there's a list of resources available that we otherwise someone would have just called 911, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't know if you guys use Signal, but Signal is great and you guys should use it. Sorry, does anyone have any questions? Oh yeah, self-defense classes. So the way that we started, so essentially the first thing we wanted to do was fundraise to give people tasers and stun guns and pepper spray. And then we wanted to put them in a designer bag. And people were like, why do you want to give them a bag? And I'm like, well, why does our existence only have to be about death and protection? Why can't we have nice things too? So we took a photo shoot. We did a photo shoot with a Telfar bag. And then Telfar reached out to us, again, gave us hella bags. So now Telfar is part of our official self-defense kit. So whenever we do distribution, we give them away with a Telfar bag. So that's why you always see Telfar bags with our stuff. And we were asking like our girls, our chicas, our community, like what are some other things that you want, that you need? And self-defense classes and lessons was one thing that kept coming up. We also were in touch with folks in LA and folks in Chicago. That's the Self-Defense Fund LA and Thorn Self-Defense in Chicago. Trans Self-Defense in LA and Thorn Self-Defense in Chicago, who were also doing similar work. And we touched base with them and kind of use their, we use their model to kind of like guide ours. And actually, before I talk about our self-defense class, there was the first trans self-defense class to ever happen in US history, actually started in Oakland. Their Instagram is called Trans Fighters. They have a weekly, I think every Saturday or Sunday in the East Bay, they have a weekly self-defense lesson. And that happens every week. So for our program, what we did was we fundraised to pay trans people to take self-defense classes. We had a 12-week course and it just ended. But next year, what we're going to do is we're going to have monthly classes in an outdoor location in different locations across the Bay Area. They're going to be free for all queer and trans people. We're going to have stun guns and pepper gel for everyone when you come. And if we can get more bags, we'll have bags there too. And we're also working on producing like TV and film content so that we can share self-defense on a broader scale. And it's really important for us to provide this because self-defense is like going to a dojo or learning about fighting or even going to the gym can be really triggering or uncomfortable for queer and trans people. So our program is like very tailored to our community. People feel safe, people feel comfortable. You know, you're with like-minded people, you get down and dirty and physical. And another thing that when we talk about self-defense, a lot of the violence that occurs in queer and trans people right now is through interpersonal relationships or from partner, it's like partner violence. So that's another thing that we're incorporating into our self-defense classes is like the thing about mediation and having like healthy relationships. So there's that part that's like mental, emotional too, that has to do with self-defense and protecting yourself. Yeah, we're really excited to launch. So right now, let's see. Our website, we are like slowly working on it. I'm gonna put it in the chat. It's like not really updated, but we're gonna update it soon. We've been waiting for .us. So since we launched, I've lost track of how many stun guns and tasers we've given out, but we've raised like over $200,000. We've been invited to New York and we went to New York 2 times to give out pepper gels. We've also been hit up by people from different cities. They're like, hey, can you start to arm the girls in our city? And while that sounds like exciting, it's actually, to me, it's really sad that like the need for this work is so great. You know, like people need it, people want it so greatly that just the need is there. That means that that's really sad that this is a need, you know? So that, one, it breaks my heart. Two, when people ask us from other cities, we say, oh, we don't want to, but we'll tell you how we did it so that you can start your own initiative there. Because every city and every city, every community has their own like culture, their own needs, you know, that are specific to their location. So it's better for us to like share the knowledge for folks how to protect themselves versus like going somewhere and starting something and like growing like an empire or whatever. Like that's not what we're trying to do. Does anyone have questions? Yeah, I apologize. I had a really long day. So just to be like honest, so all of the work that we do is 100% volunteer. And because I had EDD, I was able to do it full time. And the work like this is not sustainable at all. Like we are not a 501c3. There is no way in hell that we would be able to get grant money or federally funded money to give people weapons and to give criminal aliens free money, because essentially that's what we're doing. The trans asylum seekers, tasers are considered weapons, or pepper spray, depending on the state. So everything that we do is 100% crowdfunded and community powered. So there's no way that we'd be able to be an organization or like get grant money to do this work. So it's not sustainable at all. So it's all volunteer. And because most of us had EDD or like had side gigs, DJing, other stuff, we were able to sustain ourselves. But my EDD ended, so I had to get a real job. So now I'm working a real job, and that's why I'm so tired today. So thank you for being patient with me. And yeah, I'm gonna give it up to the next person. I'll be here for the Q&A.
Thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your space and your wisdom. I especially love like your emphasis on what it means to like hold power and be able to like have a weapon, and like that kind of dynamic of like who gets to have like the power in a violent like a violent, like when you're talking about being in the club and like having a situation where there is violence. Like I've been there, and it's like, oh,
Can I say something else?
oh yes.
Okay, so when the Christians colonized the world, right? The Christians basically created cancel culture, and like the prison system is just like the extreme form of cancel culture realized. And when the Christians went and colonized the world, they went to all these other countries, and the first people, you know who the first people they went for were? They went for the queer people and the trans people. Those are the first people they went for. Because the queer people and the trans people, they were like the guardians of the culture. They were like, you know, in between the door of the spirit world and reality. They were the gatekeepers, whatever you want to call it. They have Babylons in the Philippines, the Two Spirits in Native America. Like every culture has queer and trans people on a pedestal there as like leaders. They weren't kings or queens, but they were highly, highly respected governors or guardians of the people. And they went for them first, and then without that power, without queer and trans people in power, that in that position, they were able to convert everyone into Christianity through rape, through slavery, through murder. So when you look at it now, it's like that work is still the work that they started hundreds of years ago. It's still continuing today. And that's like, I'm relating that to cancel culture because like I've been canceled for my family. Like it's about to be Thanksgiving time. I had a very emotional weekend. My sister's getting married. But I'm not going to any of those things because I've been canceled from my family for being a faggot. okay? And there's a lot of, we know a lot of queer and trans people who've been canceled from their families too, or homeless, whatever. Like cancel culture is when if there was like a room or a space for conversations to happen with my family or with any family to learn and realize these things are a space to grow, then, you know, life could be so much different. But we have to kind of create that reality and just embody it ourselves, right? And create the reality that we need. Because cancel culture is like the dominant thing, the dominant thread. So let's break it. And let's allow for growth. But I mean, some people deserve to be canceled, so cancel them if they deserve it as a last resort. Okay, I'm done.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you. That's so important. Okay, I'm looking here. Okay, it looks like the 10-minute break is about now. We can go ahead and go into that, and then after that, we are going to hear from Project Survive, from Tatiana specifically. Okay, everyone, that concludes our 10-minute break. Now we're going to hear from Project Survive. We will be joined by Tatiana Luboviski-Acosta from Project Survive. Tatiana is a Latinx, non-binary, hard femme, transmasculine, queer, and visibly disabled anarchist, poet, and artist of Indigenous, Lenca, and Nahuatl and Jewish descent. They're a proud Project Survive peer educator, as well as an intern with the City of San Francisco Office of Sexual Harassment and Assault Response and Prevention, also known as SF Sharp. A product of generations of resilience against genocide, colonization, and assimilation, as well as a survivor of generational gendered violence. They are committed to dreaming of a future where their job does not exist.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Hi, good evening, everyone. I am admittedly extremely nervous, even though I do like a dozen Project Survive presentations and, you know, have facilitated in this class. So just please bear with me. I'm actually a pretty shy person. Yes, I'm Tatiana Luboviski-Acosta, and I am a Project Survive peer educator. Thank you to the Abolition 101 coordinators for inviting me and reaching out to me. I also want to thank Adele Fels-Carpenter, who is the Project Survive coordinator here at City College, who trusted me with representing Project Survive. And I know that we have several Project Survive peer educators, both current and former, here in the class this evening. And I really want to write by y'all. I want to honor y'all and all the work that you do. I also want to let everyone know that we will be talking about some pretty difficult things in this presentation, or I will be addressing some pretty difficult things in this presentation. I won't be doing the Project Survive presentation because I only have about 15 minutes. That being said, if there's enough interest in something happening in the future, I would love to do it for all of you. It's just a really wonderful thing to watch. So just like quick history of Project Survive, it was started in 1993 by Leslie Simon, who I believe is now the current head of SF Women Against Rape. And it originally started with Leslie teaching a class called Women in Violence in the 1980s. And I think that a lot of students were coming through the class who were survivors of sexual violence, witnesses to relatives and folks going through gendered violence, that she decided to develop a curriculum, a type of curriculum that was peer education based and would empower students to empower each other and educate them about the importance of preventing sexual assault. We do live in a society. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even do, I'm gonna do a quick visual description. Sorry about that. After like asking people to do it all the time. So yeah, I'm a light brown skinned, trans masculine, high femme person. I have long dark hair, red lipstick. I'm wearing a periwinkle shirt with red print on it that says "Fuck the police, abolish the police, chinga la migra." I have a marigold and a white rose right here. I'm backlit by my stove. There's some laundry behind me because I'm Naka like that. And I'm in my kitchen and I'm coming at you from Yelamu, unceded Ramaytush Ohlone lands. So thank you for the reminder. Yeah, so Leslie ended up developing a curriculum for City College students, and that developed into politics of sexual violence, what we now know as Women and Gender Studies 54, and ending sexual violence, so Women and Gender Studies 55. And with that, Project Survive has been around for now 28 years. In 2015, we started offering, in collaboration with SFUSD, presentations in the high schools, 16 SFUSD high schools. Yeah, thank you for dropping that in the chat, Alex. Where we do a 2-day, in non-COVID times, it would be a 2-day program called Expect Respect, where we talk to teenagers about healthy relationships, dismantling rape culture myths, and the cycle of violence. So that's the basis of the Project Survive mission, is to go into classrooms here on the City College campus and do these presentations. I also wanted to talk a little bit about how I got into this work. So I'm originally, I've had a lot of weird jobs in my life. One of the weirdest and honestly most traumatizing one being a genocide researcher for a law professor. And that was a very brief gig that had me interviewing victims of sexual violence at the hands of governments. So we often use the term genocide, but one of the things that I worked on was a working definition of democide, which is when a government tortures and kills its own people. So I interviewed a lot of women from Nicaragua, Colombia, largely those two. And through that was also dealing with my own history of trauma, my own family's history in Nicaragua and Argentina as well. And also the fact that I come from a long line of rape victims, both incestual rape and genocidal rape as well. So I kind of have always, my work has always kind of been around feminicide and violence against women, gendered violence. And somehow I ended up doing birth work. And through that, supporting a lot of survivors of sexual violence and giving birth. So when I came back to City College in the fall of 2020, I just kind of wasn't sure what I was doing with my life. My 30th birthday to myself, my 30th birthday present to myself was to go back to school full time. And then the pandemic hit and I had a mother to support. So I had to stay and work full time, but I still went to school full time. And found myself, I don't actually know how, in Adele's Women and Gender Studies 54 class, so politics of sexual violence, and on a whim, registered for 55. And I had seen the flyers around campus about Project Survive and had honestly thought that it was a peer counseling program, which I had no interest in being in. And through working with my classmates and through the material, had found myself basically finding language for my own experiences, but also the experiences of the women that I had interviewed over the years for my own family, and really just starting to look at it more from a structural point of view. So those classes are still being offered. And if you do want to become a Project Survive peer educator, please register for Women and Gender Studies 55. You can still become a Project Survive peer educator without taking 54. We just ask that you take it the first semester that you work as a peer educator. Where am I going with this? Oh yeah, so I've been doing this now for 2 semesters, and it has quite honestly changed the trajectory of my life. Being able to speak to people about the importance of healthy relationships. I know, yeah, it sounds a little shocking. Yes, Women and Gender Studies 55 and 54 after. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, to be able to talk to people about healthy relationships and also help them identify why they or people that they love continue to stay in abusive relationships, to be able to identify things such as the cycle of violence, and to then provide them with resources, which we do, has been incredibly empowering. And there are times when I will explain to other people who are not familiar with Project Survive or have never seen a Project Survive presentation, non-students, adults, and, you know, talk to them about the healthy relationship brainstorm specifically. And I have come to realize that most people don't really know what a healthy relationship could look like. So I'm just gonna, you know, I have some time, I think. I just wanted to like go through a really important part of the presentation, which is called What Do You Think? And I'm just gonna ask each of you to either give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So thumbs up if you agree with the statement, or a thumbs down if you don't agree. Okay. Rape is caused by uncontrollable sex drives. Okay, I got one disagree. Okay. Women provoke rape. Most women who are raped ask for it, want it, or deserve it. Okay, seeing a lot of thumb downs. Most rape victims are raped by strangers. Okay. Most rapes are reported to the police. Okay. Men cannot be raped, so they do not have to be concerned about it. Most people are raped by someone from a different race, culture, ethnicity than their own. It is okay for a husband to rape his wife. Since sex workers perform rape for money, they cannot be raped. People always know if they have been raped. A woman will often say no to sex when she means yes. Anyone who first agrees to sex and then tells a partner to stop is partially responsible if the partner does not stop and so commits rape. People in same-sex relationships do not have to worry about battery or rape in their dating relationships. A person who is beaten or abused must like it or need it. Otherwise, that person would leave the relationship. Okay, so it seems like we got pretty much 100% thumbs down on all of those statements, and Project Survive does disagree with all these statements. These are myths, and they're myths and stereotypes that society teaches us, and it's why, honestly, why Project Survive is so important, because we can have conversations about dismantling them and why we disagree with them. And it's always, you know, someone, you know, occasionally will be like, I don't know, or will agree with something. And we always do try to emphasize that it's not your fault if you do believe that, like, not to feel bad, not to shame that person, because like I said earlier, these are myths and stereotypes that are kind of shoved down our throats by the dominant culture, which is a rape culture. Yeah, so I mean, we believe in promoting healthy sex and healthy relationships and preventing sexual violence. And that also being said, we have a sex positive philosophy. That means that we don't have any judgment of anyone's sexual expression, and everyone has everyone has the right to sex without judgment or criticism. And that goes to say that they also have the right to say no to sex without judgment or criticism. So I think, honestly, that's really all I have to say. I think I just hit time, and I'm going to go ahead and drop some resources in the chat, some COVID specific resources, as well as a link to this like cute little documentary that the cinema department made about Project Survive in 2014. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off. And thank you so much, everyone. So.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. I think what you shared is definitely making me want to take those 2 classes that Alex put in the chat. And also, yeah, to uplift also what Kari said. Thank you so much for trusting us with some really personal things. Okay, now I want to introduce someone, a dear friend of mine actually, from APIENC, Leo Hedge, he, they pronouns, is a trans 2nd-generation Indian American who was raised in Edison, New Jersey. And since 2019, he has been living and learning in so-called Oakland / Ohlone land. Leo started their work with APIENC, an organization which builds transgender, non-binary, and queer Asian Pacific Islander power, as an active member of the Trans Justice and Core Committees. Now as one of APIENC's community organizers, Leo's role focuses on building systems for true community safety by supporting our members to develop alternatives to harmful institutions, such as police and prisons. In all of his work, relationships, and community, Leo strives to bring compassion and care. Alongside organizing, Leo loves listening to, playing, and writing music. He is a beautiful songwriter. All right, welcome, Leo.
Wow, thanks, Troy, for that intro. Troy is also an amazing musician, by the way. So yeah, I'm Leo. I use he and they pronouns, and I'm really glad to be here with y'all today. And I just want to start by saying thanks so much to Tatiana for telling us more about Project Survive and sharing some of your experiences, and for Guerilla too for telling us more about Arm the Girls. And yeah, thanks for the coordinators and facilitators of this class who invited me to be here. Really happy to be here. So I can give a quick visual description. I am a masculine presenting person with short curly hair, glasses, light brown skin, and I'm wearing a navy blue sweater with like patches of white and red and yellow. And in the background, there's like a brown wood paneled wall and like a black guitar case in the corner. And I think Troy already shared a little bit about me, so I'm gonna go ahead and just tell y'all about APIENC. And I'm gonna share my screen to do that. Cool. Can y'all give me a little thumbs up if you can share my screen, okay? Or see my screen, okay? Sweet. Okay. Cool. All right, y'all. So, as Troy mentioned, I'm a community organizer with APIENC. It's spelled APIENC. It's a grassroots organization of trans and queer API people who are fighting for justice in the Bay Area. And as Troy mentioned, I joined in 2019 as a volunteer, mostly working towards trans justice. And since June of this year, I've been a staff member with APIENC, so I've gotten to organize with our community full time, which has been awesome. And APIENC in its current iteration is an organizing home with projects led primarily by young trans and non-binary people. So we've built programs and campaigns centered on fighting unjust immigration policies, resourcing trans people to be seen, reclaiming our power in community safety, uncovering our histories as trans and queer Asian Pacific Islander folks, and providing mutual aid through our relationships. So, before I talk a little more about how we're building up community safety at APIENC, I think it's helpful to touch on the dominant narrative around safety in the broader Asian and Pacific Islander community. So, first off, can I see like a show of hands or emojis for folks who have seen the term anti-Asian hate or the hashtags Stop API Hate or Stop Asian Hate? Okay, sweet. I'm seeing some hands, some thumbs up. Cool, 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 cool. Yeah, it's become extremely widespread, and I just wanna recognize the work of the Stop API Hate Coalition because they do a lot of groundbreaking work to just raise awareness around anti-Asian racism, and yeah, the movement has received a ton of unprecedented attention and support. But like any movement, there were both some wins and some challenges to this movement. So we can dig into that a little bit together. So just by writing in the chat, can y'all tell me where did you first see these terms or hashtags being used? And I'm gonna see if I can actually see the chat because right now I can't see it. Twitter, okay. Instagram. Cool. So definitely on social media. Can I yeah, we can talk about that. Sure. Yeah. I'm wondering if that's a question I can answer towards the end. Yeah. Signs in SF after anti-Asian violence this year. Um, yeah, to promote police and anti-blackness. Totally. Um, and yeah, I guess that kind of relates to the second question, but you can also tell me in the chat, how are the narratives of crime and trauma against Asian Americans being used? So someone said to promote police and anti-blackness. I think definitely, yeah, that's how it's been used. Anything else on how these narratives have been used in the media, especially? Yep, yep. Not being used to talk about refugees and deportation. Yeah, so y'all are totally getting this in the chat, but oftentimes this trauma and this harm that APIs are experiencing is being used to advance a specific conservative agenda, right? The wave of attention around these incidents has been used to push a tough on crime agenda, and mainstream media coverage. We see these images and stories of primarily Asian elders being attacked, and often, the media stories are pushing this like anti-black narrative, oftentimes seeing like stories about perpetrators who are unhoused. And we know that these stories being highlighted by the media are a direct response and backlash against the defund police movement, right? All these stories are focusing on individual perpetrators and internal hate as a mindset, rather than considering the conditions and the systems that are leading to the violence. So we don't see this highlighted in the media, but we know that police and prisons and ICE are a form of anti-Asian violence. And we've seen these stories so often used to justify increased policing and prisons, and ignoring the way that these systems actually target primarily working class, refugee, and trans and queer Asian American communities, and take funds away from those solutions that actually serve us. So all that to say, Stop Asian Hate has been a really powerful entry point for a lot of people, but it's not our ending point, right? We need to prevent API individuals' harm being used to advance a reactionary, tough on crime agenda, And our organizing work needs to encompass trans and queer liberation, decarceration, demilitarization, and the abolition of ICE. So we saw all of that happening in the media, but at the same time, APIENC has been directly documenting our community's real safety needs. We know that queer and trans, gender nonconforming, non-binary APIs are subject to violence. And we decided at APIENC that we want to reclaim ownership of our own stories by collecting evidence of the violence that has been happening for generations. So as a content warning, I will be talking a little bit about that violence in relation to housing, assault, and policing. So if you need to, please feel free to step away for the next minute or so as I talk about that. So through a member-led survey of over 200 trans and non-binary people in the Bay Area from 2019 to 2020, we found that over 1 in 5 of our respondents have been unhoused, that more than 80% of respondents change their appearance regularly to avoid harassment, that nearly 2/3 survived sexual assault, and more than 40% experienced domestic abuse. But even though we faced high levels of violence, the police do not make us feel safe. So more than half of the respondents have been disrespected by police, including some who experienced abuse and assault at the hands of police. So all that being said, we need safety that is rooted in community and not in the police. Community safety has been an issue for us long before this past year. You know, for generations, trans and queer people, very existence has been criminalized. And our work at APIENC builds on that long legacy of trans and queer folks who've had to defend each other from police violence, who struggled to find safe work and homes, and who had to heal just from everyday oppression. So at APIENC, we believe that safety comes from having our needs met for housing, for food, for healthcare, for mental health, for community, and more, just fully met. So the way that we try to work on safety is by building deep relationships across isolation. So where the current systems don't support us, we've created phone trees during COVID, built up mutual aid networks, and trained many QT APIs, and only this past year on asking for help and for offering help. We work a lot on growing long-term and values-led trans and queer API leaders. And we know that making safe communities isn't just about rapid response solutions, it means investing in our own self-determination. So each year we train over 50 young trans and queer API folks to become organizers and to become leaders. And the last part of this is creating real solutions. So we do a lot to scale our own members up on creating alternatives to policing, like safety pods or safety teams, and joining calls to defund the prison industrial complex in the Bay Area. And I want to also just share some specific examples of what that looks like with y'all. So since 2015, we've shown up with a contingent of trans and queer API folks at Transmarch. In pre-pandemic times, that looked like teach-ins. So we talked about things like trans justice, alternatives to policing. We led pod mapping workshops. And when we marched, we had a community safety contingent who were trained in de-escalation skills and conflict resolution and were ready to keep us safe when we were on the streets. And in 2020, due to the pandemic, we shifted Transmarch online. But we continued to center creating community-based safety. So we held a workshop called Community Safety Then and Now. And this is the flyer. So as you can see, it was for trans and non-binary Asian Pacific Islanders and API allies. And the intent was to learn from histories of how Black, trans, and Asian Pacific Islander people have kept each other safe historically. So we had a lot of really great case studies through that. We've also had some really sweet collaborations with our movement partners at Asian Prisoner Support Committee, and I'll share a couple of those. So the first one I want to share is from the Roots program, which is APSC's Ethnic Studies program in San Quentin. And one of our organizers co-facilitated an LGBTQ workshop with that program and wrote a really nice reflection about their experience. So I'm curious if anybody would want to read this part of their reflection out loud. And you can let me know in the chat or just by unmuting and reading it.
I'll do it. This is Charlie. And you just want us to read it out?
Yeah, that would be great.
The Roots program. I've been moved and inspired to become a better person because the Roots participants set an incredible example for what it means to love with an open heart and an open mind. I will go back again and again to be a messenger of the peace and compassion they offer to the world. I will continue to envision a world without prisons, where everyone else can experience my brother's peace and compassion in the free world.
Yeah, thank you so much for reading that. And I think it's just a really lovely quote from Tracy. All right, so some other things that I want to share about. We also do a lot of different political education spaces. So one of the things we worked on was a collab between our organization, Asian Prisoner Support Committee, and the Alliance of South Asians Taking Action. So in 2016, we had this convening on redefining safety and security, and we touch on issues of incarceration, surveillance, and policing across API communities. And we do a lot of leadership development work too. So every year since 2018, APIENC's partnered with APSC to provide organizing training to formerly incarcerated and trans and queer API abolitionists. And during the summer, rising leaders are invited to be joint organizers and to participate in APIENC's yearly leadership exchange, where they're supported to build organizing, community, and concrete skills. And at APIENC, we know we can continue to create safety in our movements and in our communities. So last year in 2020, we made an important decision as an organization. And
Oh, Leo, hi.
yeah, what's up?
Can we wrap up your section?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to let you know. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, yeah, I'll actually end here with actually this graphic that Troy made. So I'll leave y'all on this. And essentially, the goal of this theory of change is to grow the number of people who participate in and lead movements rooted in values, history, emotional intelligence, and compassion. And we want to build a movement culture that's skillful at healing and creates long-term solutions. So I'll leave y'all with that. And I guess we'll have some time for Q&A too, if we want to talk about questions. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Leo. That was beautiful. And thank you for showcasing how y'all are out here doing really important work, taking care of each other and keeping on our discussion today with a collective care and the way that our community holds us and keeps us safe in community. Right now, we're going to go into our 10-minute Q&A for BIPOC class members. BIPOC folks, please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question or type something in the chat to let us know that you'd like to speak or that you'd like to have your question read out loud for you. We'll open it up for questions from everyone the last 5 minutes. And after the Q&A, we're not gonna go on Rick Arms today. We're just gonna do a Q&A. But please remember to send a message to the person marked as host to let them know if you are white so they can arrange. Oh, I'm reading the wrong thing again. I'm sorry, y'all. It's been a long day too. But yes, we're going to go into the Q&A now. And the first question that we have, just to start off, and this is for both of our presenters, is how, in your wildest dreams, how do you imagine us create an abolitionist world, and how does this overlap with CCSF?
I can go. And so funny, like after hearing so many different folks answer this question so differently. But when this question was posed to me in the summer before the semester started, the thing that I thought of was how you know, City College and so many different community colleges throughout the state are the ones that are training police officers. And yet, you know, here at City College, we have the sexual health educator certification, yet we don't have any kind of domestic violence certification. We actually don't have very many on-campus resources for survivors. We don't have any access. Oh, sorry, I just saw the chat. You know, we don't have access to housing as students, and in a city with a major housing crisis. You know, we have students that are sleeping in the parking lot at Ocean campus. We have survivors that lose access to their housing. And I really feel like I have like, honestly, like, I wish that Project Survive didn't have to exist. I wish that this class didn't have to exist. Like, that's really like my big ass, like wishing that we wouldn't have to have these conversations. And that's why I always say, like, my goal is to work myself out of a job. That being said, like, I would love for City College to become like an autonomous thing, not something governed by the Board of Trustees, not something that has to constantly be in court with the city in order for funding to be released, not having to like worry about our professors getting fired or pink slipped or our programs being cut, and for us to be able to kind of take resources and distribute them to our students. And a big part of that would be like having resources and access for survivors, including housing and yeah.
I'll go. I think a realistic way that we can build abolition or create it. So we think of abolition as like taking down the system, right? But the system is based on a culture and based on ideas. And in order for us to take that down, I feel like it has to start inside. So when I was talking about cancel culture earlier, what that means is like an inability to grow, an inability to take accountability, an inability to see another perspective, to look at things differently. I feel like those are things that our culture severely lacks, that feeds our prison system, that feeds cancel culture in general. And I think and as individuals and as a society, if we're able to rethink, to think about that more, then we can make abolition a real thing. Because, for example, money, right? Money is a big problem. Money is the root of all evil. But if you take money away, if you remove it from the world, greed still exists. Money isn't the actual issue. It's the greed. It's the idea. It's the need to feed the greed, the ego, the pride. That's the actual problem that needs to be addressed. And that can't happen at an institutional or systematic level. It has to happen with the individual. You know what I'm saying? I need to look at the greed that I have so I can stop being a greedy person, because if I'm greedy, it's in the world. You know what I mean? It's something that on an individual level that collectively we could change together. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think y'all shared like really strong visions. And yeah, I guess thinking about this, I think um, like just even creating like a class to share abolitionist knowledge and ideas is like part of community safety and like part of keeping each other safe. I think that's so powerful, and I'm like, um, yeah, like really inspired by y'all just doing that in the first place. Um, and I think like especially as a trans person, just like I think I envision a world where we understand that trans folks and especially trans BIPOC folks deserve to be safe in all parts of our lives and deserve to have our needs met. And I think the work that both of y'all as presenters and I think other folks in the room are doing is working towards that. So yeah.
I just want to say I hella agree with you 100% because like aside from self-defense classes and stuff, like we give out bags and we also give out money. Like a majority of the money that we've raised has actually just gone to people directly. And people, I don't know, there's a lot of critique and stuff. We get a lot of flack from like randoms or whatever. But like you said, like safety is more than just like the physical body, it's mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual also. And safety is like having your needs met. It's not just like, you know, being on the brink of fighting for your life. You know what I'm saying? It's not like, it's not just this, it's like being able to exist comfortably and happy. Yeah.
Sean has their hand raised up.
Yeah, thank you. And this is to everybody. What do people do to like combat anti-blackness in the groups that they are in? Just because like I feel like if I'm gonna be 100% honest, I'm an Aries, right? That's who we are. But if I'm to be honest, I feel like a lot of times like black people are the backs of movements, and they kind of like we kind of don't get like the credit that we deserve or the centering that we deserve, you know. Like there are problems that exist outside of blackness, but it's like I look at abolition as a rung, right? And the bottom rung being black, right? So, and that's for all, right? Because I'm a non-binary person, but I'm still treated worse than a white non-binary person, right? Or a disabled person, white versus black, right? At the end of the day, I feel like there's no true liberation without black liberation. So with that being said, like how do people like fight anti-blackness?
Yeah, I can maybe speak to that a little bit, and then if y'all want to share it too. Um, something I'm thinking about, especially in Asian Pacific Islander communities, is definitely like I think it's like really a really big part of our movements to think about anti-blackness in our communities. Um, and I know, especially last year during the uprisings, um, we really were like thinking a lot about what it means to show up in solidarity too, to like counter anti-blackness in our communities. Um, and I think part of that is like um, I think last year we normally do like fundraising work at APIENC, And last year we were like, right now that fundraising work needs to go towards folks who are fighting towards like Black Lives Matter and like movement in that movement rather than funding our work right now. So we just moved funds. I think that was like a big part of it. And I think the other thing I've been thinking about a lot is like just like centering folks who identify as both like Asian Pacific Islander and Black folks, right? Like mixed folks. I know Indo-Caribbean folks might identify as both. Other folks who find themselves navigating both racial identities, centering those folks in our movements too is really important. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking about, but curious to hear what the other presenters have to say.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. I have to say, in the United States, the anti-sexual violence or anti-rape movement is notoriously anti-Black. And I think like, especially calls for policing or calls for police being involved in any kind of sexual violence prevention. I'm not supposed to say this phrase during presentations because of people walking away with it in their head, which is the myth of the Black rapist. And one thing that I really have to hand to the curriculum of 54 and 55 is the dismantling of that, and actually the history of the police and of the Klan and of lynching in the United States. And yes, by Angela Davis. Thank you, Alex. And how, that is like required reading. And so much of the work, the vast majority of the work done in this movement has been done by Black women and Black queer women in particular. And acknowledging that, even just acknowledging that, it shouldn't be revolutionary, it should just be known. However, due to like anti-Blackness, it is not well known. So I can't really speak to it too much, but that is like a major part of the curriculum of Project Survive. So, Guerilla, if you want to answer that question.
I'm half Black and half Filipino.
I was going to say really quickly, I don't even know if the question applies to them though. So
Yeah,
you can answer it. Yeah, you can answer it if you want to, but it really does not even apply to you. Like,
thank you. I was going to say thank you for saying that. But I was going to say I'm half Black and Filipino. I was raised, I experienced a lot of anti-Blackness in my life. And honestly, I'm tired of it. And I feel like there is work that I'm doing to, stop anti-Blackness. The first thing I did was stop being anti-Black myself. So that's the first thing that I'm on anti-Blackness journey that everyone should experience first. But also, yeah, thank you.
I only had one more comment to say like about that. I just feel that at the end of the day, a lot of these movements are, like I said, are built off the backs of Black people and ignore them. Like the harm reduction, right? If you think about harm reduction is geared towards people that use opioids, and they tend to be white folks, right? What happened to harm reduction during the crack epidemic, or what happened to it? Like, where was that at when there were people overdosing on other things other than opioids? And since like I've worked in harm reduction, and like all of the people, like everybody needs harm reduction, period. But at the end of the day, it should be harm eradication. And then on top of that, it's like, why is it that we are reducing the harm done to white people rather than the harm done to Black folks? Right? Not saying that we don't need to reduce the harm that happens to white people, but they have systems for that. And harm reduction is a system in and of itself that was made for them, right? But when there are Black people overdosing from things, like they were like, you know, they were jailed, right? Nowadays, when like in the city, when people are overdosing from opioids, right? Like they don't get jails. Like, you know, you go to the hospital, you there's a program for you, all type of shit. So I just like it, and like honestly, like this class is the shape, but a lot of times when we go on and I don't know how to say this. I just feel like anti-Blackness is everywhere and it's fucking exhausting. So thank you folks for answering that. I really appreciate it.
Tatiana, I had a question for you. Hey y'all, this is Kari. Visual description is I am a light-skinned Black person with short curly hair on the top and none on the sides, and big Black headphones and clear glasses and a nose ring and a maroon button down and a white wall behind me. And I was just wondering, I think I have been thinking about this in other work, and I think you may have gone over this with Project Survive, but I wanted to just confirm. So I know that that Project Survive is very related to the two women and gender studies classes, and it sounds like those have a specific like anti-carceral lens. But like, do you feel like when you have folks join the project, do you feel like they're already there? Like, are they already abolitionists? And if not, yeah, like what does that look like okay, I'm seeing a no. And yeah, what does it look like to be working together and have such different thoughts about responding to violence when that is like really the work or like talking about relationship violence?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It's kind of interesting because I haven't, I've only been a part of Project Survive for 2 semesters. And the entire time that I've been a Project Survive peer educator, it's been online. So my experiences with people have been kind of in the Zoom world, where I think people can get pretty heated when they disagree with each other in this kind of really fascinating and also generative way. When I was in 55, there was somebody in the class who I really didn't agree with a lot of the times, and they didn't end up becoming a peer educator, not because of their lack of community buy-in, I guess, because I really do feel like in order for us to kind of attain these goals of abolition, there has to be sort of a community buy-in, much like how Guerilla said, like we have to kind of, I'm going to paraphrase, like kill the cop inside. But I also want to say that Project Survive does not have an explicitly abolitionist statement, nor anti-carceral, because we're so prevention oriented, if that makes sense. And as far as I know, the prevention orientation kind of skirts that in a way, like where we don't end up talking about what to do in certain cases. And because it's intimate partner violence and dating violence oriented, we do talk about how, folks don't report sexual assault, how folks don't report acquaintance rape, and why. And honestly, because those are least likely to be prosecuted, because the prosecutors, the DAs oftentimes will choose cases that they know that they'll win in front of a jury. And oftentimes those are, stranger danger rapes. So there is kind of like a lot of talk within the curriculum about why folks choose not to report, which I think itself is kind of like the anti-carceral involvement. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Well, can I have a little follow-up? Because that does make a ton of sense. I think also just, it sounds like, I think to like bring in the most people, and especially like folks who might not have had that political ed, but are experiencing violence, like totally understand why you wouldn't have an explicitly abolitionist agenda like to the public. And yeah, I was kind of wondering like if you're doing, I don't know the extent of the peer education, but like does it look like some people being like, oh, you should definitely call the cops, or like you should definitely report this, or something like that?
I do know that we do have to move on to the next segment. So I'm going to
sorry.
No, you're fine, Kari. So I'm going to be pretty quick. I'll give an example. So when I was in 55, we were presented with a scenario that was actually based off of something that really happened. And it was something taking place at a high school involving an uptick in sexual harassment on campus. And we were given we were broken up into certain groups, into various groups, and then given scenarios and what we thought would be appropriate. And it became very clear that there was sort of a division in the class. There were folks who were advocating for transformative justice practices, not restorative justice, but transformative justice. And then there were people who were advocating for safety officers. And specifically, they did name the high school. The high school was Mission High, which is very high POC immigrant population. Yeah, and to hear people advocate for the presence of more police on a high school campus for a lot of people was deeply upsetting. So I think after that happened in the class, it became very clear where a lot of people stood, if that makes sense. And I think we all sort of related to each other very differently. So you can't become a Project Survive peer educator without going through 55. So yeah.
Thank you, Tatiana, and thank you, Kari, for that question. I think a lot about how transformative justice organizers talk a lot about how we need both prevention and response work. So the political education, relationship building, etc., and the community interventions, the accountability processes. Now we can transition into how you might imagine us pursuing an abolitionist community safety training program. Factoring in all the insight our three speakers and the rest of our speakers throughout the entire project has given, what are some ideas and possible concerns for this community safety training program?
Sorry, just to clarify, is that a question for us or for the full group?
For all of us, yeah. So if you want to jump in, feel free. Anyone can jump in.
I want to drop something in the chat as a member of the class, not as a speaker, sorry. I'm going to drop the bystander intervention mixtape, just because I do feel like bystander intervention is something that is really important in our communities. And then I think Charlie has his hand raised.
Oh yeah, go for it, Charlie.
Yeah. So again, this is Charlie. I didn't give a visual description before, but that's because I don't have my camera on. This is something that I've, talked about a little kind of one-on-one with folks in smaller meetings, but something that, kind of like the direction that I see a lot of organizations I really respect going in is like, continuing to build power and build infrastructure kind of outside of the systems that are in place. Because when they do, start to work more closely and more officially, like with larger institutions like a school or a city or whatever, it tends to get kind of co-opted and defanged. And I love the work that that everyone involved in this class, from facilitators to speakers to coordinators to just people showing up and participating, like that's something that I love to see. And like I look at, and sorry if y'all can hear a crying baby in the background, that would be my housemate's kid. And like I think a lot of like APTP Mental Health First lead, where they, they started with their own, they started with mental health first, and it's, it's been so successful that now the city of Oakland is creating Macro, which is basically a copy of Mental Health First. So like APTP has still managed to maintain its, autonomy and its, agency and its ability to, to get things done, honestly. And, now the city is coming in and, kind of creating their own version of it, which I feel is kind of like, if the city is going to do that, that's like kind of the best case scenario, where like mental health first doesn't get co-opted. And so, my view is that I would love to see, I'd love to see Build Abolition kind of go on a similar path where, we don't wait around for the city to catch up to us. We don't wait around for the school to catch up to us. We, take care of each other. We build what we need to build. And, and like, hopefully the city catches up. Hopefully the college catches up. But if they don't, we're not left stranded.
A question I want to ask folks is, how at City College we have that phenomenal health worker program, the community health worker program, and we have the community mental health work. We also have the drug counseling certification program. And I know that right now we're operating within the interdisciplinary studies department, but I'm wondering if reaching out to, much like how the sexual health educator certification does, reaching out to like the health department, the health education department, and working alongside them as well, would be something to consider if maybe there's student organizations within that department that we don't even know about, and seeing if working with them would be an option.
Hey, I'm Micah. I'll do a quick visual description. I'm a white non-binary person. I have little like 5 days of facial hair, and my hair is parted down the middle and tucked behind my ears and like down to my shoulders. I'm wearing a blue button-down shirt, and I wanted to ask: have we talked about what this what the community safety training program would look like? Like what did the host say? Yeah, that was my question. But Ava just answered it in the chat that it's in response to one of the initial goals of replacing police training with abolitionist community safety training instead. And I was thinking along those lines, I think that developing a program is important, and especially for longevity, like to make a space for people to develop the skills that we need that are not going to be taught at the college otherwise. But I also think that like the networks that can provide that support are equally as important, especially in the meantime. So I think like Tatiana's idea of like having space for survivors at City College to like you know like spaces for refuge, or also even like consciousness raising groups among like people both who are escaping abusive relationships as like abusers, and especially people who are escaping abusive relationships as survivors. And like if we could set all of those spaces up in the college where so many people in the city are connected to City College in one way or another, I think it could have like a huge effect on the culture of our city, just because City College is so connected to so many people.
I forgot who it was who spoke a little while ago, but they talked about housing, and it might have been, yeah, I mean, they were speaking about housing, but they were specifically speaking about shelters. And honestly, like how shelters and like a lot of community housing have a lot of police presence on them, and how folks oftentimes will like opt out of living in certain situations because of the presence of the police, or because they can't have access to their ways of coping, or they have curfews, and just like how these different things would look like. And I don't know, I'm kind of like thinking about that in terms of like the idea around having places of refuge, as Micah put it, like at City College and through City College, because so many of our students, you know, they're not traditional students necessarily. Having that be a resource for them for sure. But I have to say, you know, I do worry about the co-opting of any kind of program that we do. I can say right now, like Project Survive is something that City College always brags about and touts and calls award-winning, yet we're constantly under threat of being cut, and Adele is constantly getting pink slips, and we're told that we're not going to be, and Maggie too, and like we're constantly being told like we're not cutting Project Survive, yet they're always threatening our student budget, our hiring budget. So there are ways that the institution can undermine a project like this, and that is something to consider. So I'm just kind of putting that out there as a cautionary sort of thing.
Thank you so much for that, Tatiana. I want to give, we're nearing the end. I want to give one more second for any last minute questions. But outside of that, I want to thank everyone, especially the speakers, for sharing space with us and for sharing the ways in which we can collectively implement care to each other. So if anyone else has any last minute questions, I think we can wrap up here.
Hi, I just want to let folks know before we go that we're about to drop our our Arm the Girls 2022 campaign in like a week or two. We just did a photo shoot with 3 trans asylum seekers from Visibility, and we have new. Let me see if I have one. We have new self-defense kits. This isn't what they actually look like, but it's kind of what they look like. They're like keychains. And the pepper sprays are different this time because these ones have like a laser pointer, which is really cool. And then the sound alarm is a heart. But yeah, we're gonna drop it really soon. So if anyone who is a visibly presenting queer or trans femme, Black or Indigenous person of color, and you need safety stuff, send us a message on We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For on Instagram, and or wait for our campaign launch, and we're gonna do distribution in January. But every event that we do, we usually like bring tasers and pepper spray with us. And if your campus, like some UC Berkeley hit us up because they want like a self-defense class. So we're gonna come through and do a lesson with them. But if your campus or group wants something like that, we can set something up. But I just wanted to let you all know that we are available and accessible to folks who need it. And thank you for having me.